Millionaire saved a mother and her child freezing on Christmas Eve. What he did changed everything. Early on Christmas Eve, Elena Navarro woke up with a heaviness in her chest, the same weight that had followed her for weeks. Today was the last day. There were no more chances, no more extensions. The final eviction notice, taped to her door the night before, still burned in her mind like an icy blade. She knew that when the clock struck 10, she and her daughter would no longer have a place to call home. The cramped room they had lived in for over a year looked even worse in the pale winter morning light. Half-packed cardboard boxes leaned against the wall. Clothes were scattered on the floor. A few broken toys lay in the corner, and Lila's one-armed doll rested beneath the bed. Elena looked around and swallowed the bitterness rising inside her. All of this messy pile of what remained of their life, was about to become meaningless. Lila was still asleep, curled under the thin blanket Elena had washed so many times it was nearly threadbare. She was only 4, her tiny face peaceful in a way that made Elena's heart ache. How could she explain to her little girl that the only home she had ever known would vanish within hours? How do you tell a child that safety can disappear without warning? Elena had worked endlessly, running shifts at 3 different eateries just to survive. A busy Mexican restaurant, a large buffet, and a small brunch cafe near the harbor. The jobs were unstable, the pay average, but she always managed. She washed dishes, wiped tables, prepped vegetables, cleaned storage rooms. Anything, any shift, any hour. Then the work began to vanish, slowly at first, then all at once. The Mexican restaurant stopped calling altogether. The owner cited slow business, promised to reach out again, but never did. The buffet, where she knew every shelf and every pot, replaced her with the owner's niece. They didn't even tell her. Her messages asking for the week's schedule became shorter, then stopped entirely. Only the brunch cafe remained, and they kept her for exactly 1 Saturday shift. 1 day of work couldn't pay for electricity, let alone rent. Elena went everywhere looking for a job: cafes, restaurants, bakeries, bigger chains. The answer was always the same: sorry, we're not hiring right now. She applied to delivery apps and was rejected. Thought of selling homemade pastries but didn't even have money for ingredients. Every possible solution, every small spark of hope, eventually died out. Each month, a notice of overdue rent slid under her door, like a cruel reminder of her shortcomings. And then, the night before, the landlord left the last one. 10 a.m., December 24th. You must leave. No more delays. Sorry. There would be no Christmas miracles for her. Elena stepped out of bed, her bare feet touching the icy floor. She put on her worn sweater and slowly gathered the last few items, not because they were valuable, but because she didn't know what else she'd have left. Lila stirred, rubbing her eyes. "Mommy, where are we going today?" Elena forced a smile. "We're going for a little walk, sweetheart." Lila smiled innocently. Elena turned away so her daughter couldn't see the pain threatening to break through. 10 o'clock in the morning. The landlord waited at the stairwell, offering nothing more than a stiff nod. No questions, no good luck, no sympathy. Elena gripped her daughter's hand, pulled the suitcases down the stairs, and stepped into the freezing Christmas Eve air. For a long moment, she stood on the sidewalk as if her legs no longer knew which direction to take. The cold wind slapped against her face, sharp enough to make Lila flinch, but Elena couldn't show fear. She forced a thin smile, pulling the squeaky suitcase down the snowy slope and adjusting the slipping knit hat on her daughter's head. "You okay, Lila?" The little girl nodded, though Elena could see her tiny hand trembling. The streets were full, people rushing home with gifts, food, warmth, joy. But Elena and Lila? They had only each other, and a future that was painfully, terrifyingly empty. They walked toward the nearest bus stop. People lined up with gift bags, holiday boxes, bright scarves, and cheerful laughter blending with Christmas bells ringing overhead. Elena opened her wallet. $8, barely enough for 2 bus tickets and a cheap hot dog. She bought the hot dog, took 2 small bites, and gave the rest to Lila. The child ate slowly, carefully, as if afraid the warm food would vanish too fast. Elena looked at her daughter and knew she couldn't wait for miracles anymore. She needed to call someone. Anyone. She sat on the icy wooden bench, pulled out her phone, and took a breath. First call, Mara, her best friend from high school. They once shared every secret of youth. After 3 rings, Mara's voice came through, familiar and warm. "El? Oh my God, it's been ages. How are you?" Elena swallowed. I got evicted this morning. Do you think Lila and I could stay a few days?" A long silence followed. Then Mara's tone softened, gentle but distant. "El, my mom is staying with me. The apartment is tiny. It's really not possible." Elena smiled even though her chest tightened. "It's okay. I understand." She hung up and scrolled again. Second call, Jenna, her old coworker from the buffet. Back then, Jenna used to say, "If you ever need anything, call me." When Elena explained her situation, Jenna let out a sympathetic gasp. "Oh, Elena, that's awful, but my spare room is full of boxes, and my brother's coming. I can't get it ready in time." Elena answered softly, "That's okay." Third call, fourth, fifth. Her former boss, a neighbor who once asked her to watch their cat, a friend from the bakery. Every one of them responded the same way. First came the "oh my God," then the perfectly reasonable excuse, house under renovation, sick parent, unexpected guests, uncomfortable spouse, and finally the gentle apology. And Elena, exhausted like a fading shadow, replied each time, "It's okay, thank you anyway." By the 7th call, her hands were numb from the wind. Another familiar voice, another soft refusal wrapped in regret. "I wish I could help, Elena. I really do. But I can't." Elena forced a smile. "It's all right." She slipped the phone back into her coat pocket, a thin cloud of breath drifting from her lips. 7 calls, 7 refusals, 7 doors closed. No one was at fault, yet no one opened their door. The hurt still lingered, trembling beneath her ribs like a wound pressed against winter air. Lila looked up at her with wide brown eyes. "Mommy, where do we go now?" Elena touched her cheek, her voice nearly cracking. "We'll walk a little more to stay warm, sweetheart." The wind kept striking their faces as they left the bus stop behind, blending into the rush of people hurrying through the holiday streets. Elena pulled her suitcase with one hand and held Lila's tiny fingers with the other, moving forward as if her steps alone could hold on to the last bit of warmth the morning offered. But that warmth vanished quickly. The sky darkened, the wind grew sharper, and the cheerful Christmas sounds behind them faded into the cold air. Elena walked without direction, not because she knew where to go, but because stopping meant letting the cold swallow them whole. So she kept moving until the lively streets thinned into a quiet uphill road. Lila clutched her arm, whispering weakly, "Mommy, I'm sleepy." Elena stroked her cheek. "You can sleep a little, sweetheart. Mommy's here." They walked a little farther until Elena saw it, a modern mansion perched on a small hill, set apart from the noisy city below. Its steel and glass architecture reflected the pale winter light, and warm yellow lamps glowed softly from the inside. The sight made Elena's chest tighten painfully. She knew she didn't belong anywhere near a place like that, but right outside the mansion's gate stood a large old tree, its wide canopy blocking the harsh wind. It was sheltered enough for Lila to rest. Elena sat beneath it, pulling the suitcases close while gathering Lila into her lap. She wrapped her daughter in the thin scarf and rubbed her back to keep her warm. Lila murmured, "Don't go, Mommy," before falling asleep in her arms. Elena leaned against the tree trunk, staring at her sleeping child until her own eyes stung. She didn't dare cry. She feared that once she began, she wouldn't be able to stop. Up on the mansion's wide balcony, Adrian Hale, 37, stood with a glass of red wine in hand. A successful entrepreneur who built a tech empire focused on data infrastructure, he had more than enough money to buy houses like this one. Yet none of them ever felt like home. He had lived alone in this vast space for years. During the holidays, the silence deepened, echoing through the halls until he could almost hear his own breathing bounce off the walls. He hated Christmas, not because it was sad, but because it reminded him of what he lacked. As he lifted the glass to his lips, his gaze drifted down the slope and caught the sight of the woman and child beneath the tree. A young woman in a thin coat, holding her child close against the wind. A worn suitcase beside them. A scene completely out of place in this wealthy neighborhood. Adrian frowned. They were probably waiting for someone. A car, a taxi, a relative. He turned away instantly. Not his problem. He had enough of his own inner chaos to deal with. But as he set the glass down, the image of the sleeping child in the woman's arms flashed back into his mind. He shook his head, walked inside, tried to distract himself with music, but half an hour passed and the wine in his glass remained untouched. With a frustrated exhale, he stepped back onto the balcony. And they were still there. The woman hadn't moved. The child slept soundly against her chest. Snow began to fall more heavily, settling on their hair and shoulders like cold ash. Something stirred in Adrian's chest, not pity, not curiosity, but something pulled up from a memory he thought he had buried long ago. Part of him told himself to ignore them, but another part, the part he thought had died, couldn't look away. And that was when the quiet obsession began, slow and subtle, like a thin crack spreading across a frozen lake. Snow thickened, swirling in the wind before settling on the narrow shoulders of the woman beneath the tree. Adrian stood on the balcony, hands pressed against the cold railing, unable to tear his gaze away from the fragile shape curled around a sleeping child. He told himself, again and again, that this wasn't his business, wasn't his problem. For years, he had perfected the habit of staying out of anything that didn't concern him. No interference, no involvement. No doors opened except the automatic ones at his company. He tried to turn back inside, but his feet didn't move. "It's not my business," he muttered under his breath, as if the words could hypnotize him. But another thought struck him harder, sharp enough to make his chest ache. It's freezing, and the little girl is far too young. He saw the woman's arms trembling as she held the child close. Even from the height of the balcony, he could see exhaustion etched into her features, the kind he'd seen before, long ago, reflected in his mother's face during cold winter nights when she did everything she could to protect him. A strong gust of wind swept across the hill, blowing snow against both their bodies. Adrian closed his eyes, sighed, and understood he had already lost the argument with himself. The wine behind him had gone cold. The mansion was so silent he could hear the wind pushing against the glass. Finally, he stepped into the living room, grabbed the thick coat hanging near the door, zipped it to his neck, and headed downstairs. Each step echoed through the wide hallway like a heartbeat growing louder. He switched on the porch lights, the soft yellow glow stretching his shadow across the snowy pavement. When the gate began to open with a soft metallic whine, Elena startled violently, tightening her hold around Lila as if the world might snatch her child away. Her eyes widened, fear, caution, weariness mixing together like storm clouds. Adrian immediately raised both hands, palms open, in a gesture of peace. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," his voice low, warm, slightly unsure. Elena didn't respond. She only looked at him, her gaze carrying the weight of someone who had run out of places to run. Adrian slowed his steps, keeping a respectful distance. "I saw you two sitting here for a while," he continued. "It's freezing. I just wanted to make sure you were all right." Elena swallowed hard, blinking back tears she refused to let fall. "We're fine," she whispered, voice brittle. "We're just resting?" But Adrian knew it wasn't true. Her words said one thing, yet her eyes, the worn suitcase and the shivering child, said something entirely different. He softened his tone. "If you need help, you can tell me. I'm not trying to intrude. It's just—" His gaze drifted to the child, tightening slightly. "She's too young for this cold." "Shut!" Elena clutched Lila's scarf, exhaled shakily, and finally let the truth slip out as if she could no longer carry its weight. "I was evicted this morning," she confessed, voice cracking. "I called people. No one could help. I have less than $8 left. I don't know where to go." The words fell into the air like shards of glass, fragile but sharp enough to cut anyone listening. Adrian stood still, snow settling on his shoulders, then breathed in deeply. "If you'd like," he said slowly, "you and your daughter can come inside. Just for tonight, until the snow eases or until you figure out your next steps." Elena's eyes widened. She shook her head instinctively. "I can't. I don't want to bother you, and we don't even know each other." "It's all right," Adrian interrupted gently. "I mean, no harm. It's just too cold. And your daughter is shivering." Elena looked down at Lila, the child's tiny shoulders trembling beneath the thin scarf. Another gust of wind rustled the branches above. She pressed her lips together and finally nodded. Small. Slow. A nod of someone who had run out of strength to fight reality. "Just tonight," she whispered. Adrian nodded once. "Just tonight." And in that moment, something in the world quietly shifted. Something that neither of them could see, but both would soon feel. The moment the door closed behind them, the warmth inside the house rose up and wrapped around Elena, stopping her mid-step. The shift was so abrupt, from the knife-sharp cold outside to the gentle heat inside, that her eyes stung, as if her body suddenly realized it didn't have to fight anymore. The living room glowed softly, polished wood floors catching the warm light, the faint scent of pine and orange drifting from a diffuser in the corner. Lila stirred in her arms, blinking awake. She looked at the high ceiling, the chandelier, then let out a tiny gasp. "Mom, is this a castle?" Her voice was scratchy and small, and Adrian let out a quiet laugh beside them. "If you want to call it that, sure," he said, and the smile in his voice loosened something tight in Elena's chest. Adrian led them up the wide staircase. Elena followed, her wet shoes making soft slapping sounds that only heightened how out of place she felt. He opened the door at the end of the hallway, and Elena exhaled shakily. The room was spacious, washed in warm light, the bed large and covered in crisp white linens. Thick curtains framed the window, and a private bathroom glowed behind a half-open door, warm air drifting out. "You can stay here tonight," Adrian said quietly. "Clean towels, hot water, everything's set up. If you need anything, just let me know." Elena nodded, though her throat was too tight for a proper answer. She set Lila down on the bed, and the little girl immediately melted into the soft blankets, closing her eyes with a blissful sigh. Elena nearly cried just hearing her daughter breathe comfortably. Adrian returned a few minutes later with a tray full of food, warm pasta, toasted bread, fruit, water, and a cup of warm milk for Lila. "I wasn't sure if you two had dinner," he said. Elena looked at the tray as if it were the most extravagant thing she'd ever seen. "You're doing too much." "I'm only doing what feels right," he answered simply. When Lila drifted into deep sleep, Elena tucked the blanket around her and sat on the edge of the bed. Adrian leaned against the doorway, neither stepping in nor leaving, waiting quietly. For the first time in months, Elena didn't feel the need to pretend she was strong. "Adrian," she asked softly, "why do you live alone in a house this big?" He inhaled slowly, eyes dropping to the floor as if searching an old memory. "I'm used to it," he said, or "I've convinced myself I am." She didn't push, she just waited. "My mom raised me alone," he began. "She worked 3 jobs, always exhausted when she got home, but she still tried to smile for me." His voice softened at the mention of her, but beneath it, Elena heard something else. A long ache that had settled so deeply it had become part of him. "I started a tech company young, later expanded into data-driven real estate. Everything grew fast, and the people who stayed grew fewer." Elena felt something twist painfully in her chest, like hearing the echo of a house that had been quiet for too many years. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "No need," Adrian replied gently. "It's just been a long time since I told anyone." Elena lowered her head, and a warm tear slid onto her hand, not from despair, but from gratitude, from the relief of finally having a place to breathe. Adrian didn't move toward her or offer comforting words. He simply stood there, quietly saying, without speaking, "You can be vulnerable now. It's okay." Elena woke early, the sky still pale, sunlight filtering softly through the heavy curtains and laying a thin golden stripe across the carpet. The first thing she noticed was the quiet, not the cold, empty kind from nights in cheap, rented rooms, but a peaceful quiet that made her want to breathe deeper. Lila was still asleep, clutching the stuffed animal Adrian had given her the night before. Her small face looked softer than usual, free from the tiny lines of worry she carried whenever they slept somewhere unfamiliar. Elena brushed a curl from her forehead, then slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her. She had already decided they needed to leave this morning. She couldn't take advantage of a stranger's kindness any longer. After steadying herself, she stepped into the hallway. But the moment she reached the bottom of the stairs, she froze. The breakfast table was already set. Golden toast, soft scrambled eggs, neatly sliced fruit, steaming coffee, and beside it all, a mug of hot chocolate with marshmallows floating on top, the kind Lila adored. Morning light spilled over the table, warm and gentle, making her chest tighten unexpectedly. Adrian stood by the stove and turned slightly when he heard her. "Morning," he said, voice low and rough with sleep. Elena wrapped her arms around herself. "You made all this?" He shrugged lightly, as if it was nothing. "Force of habit. I usually eat alone, but didn't see a reason not to make more today." She didn't know what to say. Something about his kindness felt bigger than what he let on. Adrian poured her a cup of coffee. "My mom always woke up early," he said, voice drifting like an old habit resurfacing. "Even when she worked 3 jobs, she'd try to cook me something before leaving. Scrambled eggs, toast, simple stuff." Elena sat down before her knees failed. She must have been an incredible mother. He paused for a breath. "She passed when I was 22. Cancer. It happened so fast I didn't have time to do anything." His voice didn't break, but it carried the weight of years he'd tried to outrun. Elena placed her hand on the table, close to his but not touching. "You've accomplished so much. She would be proud. Truly." A faint smile appeared, small, a little sad, but real. "Thanks. I want to believe that." Lila came downstairs then, hugging her stuffed toy. "What smells so good?" Her eyes widened at the hot chocolate. "This is for me?" Adrian nodded. "Of course." After eating, Lila ran outside, chasing sunlight and dew-bright leaves in the garden. Her laughter filled the yard, bright and alive. Elena stood in the doorway, watching her, hands clasped together, the warmth in her chest pressed against something that hurt. Happiness for her daughter, and grief for all the things she couldn't give her. Adrian stepped beside her. "Elena," he said softly, "stay one more day. Just today. It's Christmas." She watched Lila spinning in the sunlight, her brown hair catching the morning glow. The answer left her lips like a breath. All right, just today. But deep down, both of them already knew something had been shifting long before this moment. Christmas Day unfolded slowly, like a soft family movie. After breakfast, Lila ran around the living room, then curled into the couch, laughing every time Adrian switched to a new animated film. Elena sat beside her, still a little tense at first, but eventually allowed herself to relax, even if only a little, while watching her daughter's cheeks glow pink with joy. Adrian spent most of the morning showing them around every corner of the spacious house. Lila's eyes widened at the sight of the library filled with books, and she squealed when she discovered the game room with a foosball table and a massive screen. Adrian even turned on old Christmas songs, and Lila danced clumsily but happily, her laughter echoing like bells. Elena's chest tightened with emotion. Lila hadn't been this carefree in months. For the first time in a long while, Lila got to be a child again. In the afternoon, they watched a movie in the small home theater. Lila lay between them, head on Elena's lap, tiny feet resting lightly on Adrian's leg. The room glowed with soft light from the screen, and Christmas melodies drifted quietly in the background. Somewhere between those warm lights and the gentle hush of the film, Elena realized something frightening. She felt safe here. When night settled and Lila was tucked into the warm bed upstairs, Elena went down to the kitchen to get some warm water. Adrian was there, tidying up a few glasses. When he looked up, their eyes met in a way that felt almost inevitable. "Elena," he said softly, "I have a proposal." She stopped. "A proposal?" He wiped his hands on a towel and leaned slightly against the counter. "I travel a lot. This house is too big. I need a live-in house manager, someone who can oversee things when I'm away." Elena's heart skipped. "You mean me?" "Yes," Adrian nodded. "You're hardworking, careful, and I trust you. I'm offering steady pay, full housing, and a private room for you and Lila." Elena stepped back, the offer too big, too overwhelming. "Adrian, I don't want your pity. I can't take a position just because you feel responsible." He met her eyes, voice firmer than before. "Elena, this isn't pity. This is a real job offer. I genuinely need someone. You have the skills, and if it's not you, I'll still have to hire someone else." There was no hesitation in his tone, just honesty. Elena glanced toward the staircase where Lila was sleeping peacefully. She thought of the nights spent shivering under thin blankets, the endless job applications, the closed doors, the uncertain future looming over her daughter. And for the first time in months, she saw a door opening instead of closing. She inhaled, her voice trembling. If I take this job," she whispered, "I could finally give Lila what she deserves, and maybe take care of myself too." "Yes," Adrian said, softer now. "You could." Elena lifted her eyes. In Adrian's expression, she found no trace of pity, only trust, warmth, and something like hope. "Then I accept," she murmured. Adrian smiled, gentle, sincere, warm enough to soften the whole kitchen. "Good. I think this might be a new beginning for all of us." The next few days unfolded more gently than Elena expected. In the mornings, she prepared meals, folded laundry, organized the house. In the afternoons, Adrian returned from the office or a remote meeting, and the very first thing he always did was look for Lila. The little girl ran to him every time. "Uncle Adrian!" Her bright voice made Adrian laugh in a way Elena had never heard before. Slowly, the mansion stopped feeling like an empty shell. It had laughter, the smell of baked bread, the sound of small feet running up and down the stairs. It began to feel like a home, something she had once believed was impossible for her again. One evening, after Lila fell asleep, Elena stood at the sink, washing dishes under warm water. The kitchen glowed in soft light. Adrian appeared behind her, quiet as usual, but tonight he didn't just pass through. "Let me," he said, gently taking the plate from her hands. Elena let out a small laugh. "If you're washing dishes, I should check if the sky is falling." Adrian smiled. "I know how. I'm just not very good at it." They worked side by side, the only sounds the faucet and faint clinks of porcelain. A few minutes passed before Elena spoke. "Adrian, why have you never married? Never had kids?" The question slipped out more naturally than she meant it to. Adrian paused. Soap bubbles slid down the glass he was holding. He leaned against the counter, eyes drifting somewhere distant. "I was in love once," he said. "Her name was Victoria. We were together for 3 years, long enough for me to think it was time to propose." Elena didn't move, didn't interrupt. "I even bought the ring," he continued, voice lower now. "But right around then, my work exploded. I had to travel, work long hours. She gave me an ultimatum: spend more time with her or break up." Elena swallowed. "And you chose work?" "I thought if she really loved me, she would wait," he breathed out. "So I let her walk away. Didn't stop her, and that was the biggest mistake I've ever made." Silence fell, quiet but heavy enough to hear her own heartbeat. "Now I have money, success, a house," he said softly. "But sometimes it feels like having everything and nothing at the same time. Success without someone to share it with is empty." Elena turned toward him, her eyes gentler than she intended. "You have more than you think," she whispered. "You have Lila. You have this home. You have us." Adrian froze, as if the words struck something deep inside him. Then he lifted a hand and brushed his fingers lightly across her cheek. Warm, soft, a touch that didn't demand anything, but still shook her to the core. Elena didn't pull away. She just stood there, heart racing, unsure what to call the feeling rising in her: fear, gratitude, or something bigger she wasn't ready to name. She stepped back, breath unsteady. "I should check if Lila's asleep." She left the kitchen almost too quickly. Under the shower, with hot water rolling down her shoulders, Elena pressed her palms against the wall. Tears mixed with the water, some from old wounds, some from something terrifyingly new. A hope she wasn't sure she deserved, but one she could no longer pretend she didn't feel. The next morning, something unspoken lingered between Elena and Adrian. Not tension, just a shy, gentle awkwardness. Every time their eyes met, one of them looked away, as if what happened the night before was still too close, too real to acknowledge openly. In the afternoon, they went out to the garden while Lila played. The little girl chased a bright yellow butterfly, her curls bouncing with each skip. Elena sat on the wooden bench with her hands folded in her lap, watching her daughter. Adrian sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance, yet close enough that she could feel a faint warmth radiating from him. A few quiet minutes passed before Adrian finally spoke. "Elena," he said softly, "about last night. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable. I shouldn't have—" "No," Elena interrupted, gentle but firm. "I didn't feel pressured or uncomfortable." She turned toward him, her honesty so clear it made Adrian pause. "I just haven't allowed myself to feel anything for anyone in a long time," she continued. "After Lila's father left, I built walls. I lived only for her. I didn't think I would ever open my heart again. Adrian looked down at his hands. So, what are you feeling now? The question hit deeper than she expected. Elena looked at Lila, laughing freely, untouched by the world's cruelty, then back at him. I feel, she exhaled, scared, grateful, and something else I'm not brave enough to name yet. Adrian reached for her hand, hesitating for a moment before gently holding it. Elena, I'm scared too, he admitted. I've lived my whole life by plans, by control. Everything I do has a timeline, a structure. But with you, I can't plan anything. I don't know what will happen. And strangely, that's what makes me feel alive. Elena looked at their intertwined fingers. I don't want to rush, she whispered. For Lila's sake, everything has to be right. I know, Adrian said softly, giving her hand a slow squeeze. We'll go slow, no labels, no pressure. Let things unfold on their own. And if something beautiful grows from it, then we face it together, all three of us. Elena opened her mouth to respond, but emotions surged too quickly, tightening her chest. Adrian pulled her into his arms, carefully, gently, as if she were something fragile. She pressed her forehead against his chest, tears slipping out before she could stop them. I'm tired of being strong all the time, she whispered. I know, Adrian murmured, resting his chin on her hair. You and Lila, you've brought this house back to life. You've given me a reason to come home. Elena lifted her face, eyes still glistening. Adrian studied her expression a long moment, making sure she wasn't pulling away. When she didn't, he leaned down. Their first kiss was soft, unhurried, quiet, but full of promise. In the days that followed, their lives blended together so naturally that Elena often wondered if she was dreaming. They had dinner under warm lights, Lila sitting between them, talking endlessly about everything and nothing. Adrian helped clear the table, Elena washed the dishes, and Lila hummed songs while helping rinse a tiny spoon. One afternoon, Adrian found an old childhood box with a worn but adorable brown teddy bear. He handed it to Lila, and her eyes lit up. I'll name him Adrian. He laughed, though his eyes softened with emotion. Does he look like me? He does, Lila said, especially in the heart. Elena almost lost her breath. At bedtime, Adrian read her a story. When he closed the book, Lila whispered, Uncle Adrian, will you stay forever? He looked at Elena before answering. If your mom lets me. Elena smiled, her chest warming. He'll stay, sweetheart. After Lila slept, they stepped onto the balcony. The night was cool, the sky dotted with faint stars. Elena looked toward the road outside the gate, the place where she once sat, shivering in the cold. That night, she said softly, I thought I'd hit the bottom of my life. But from that bottom, I started climbing again. Because of you, because of this chance, because of... She didn't finish, but Adrian understood anyway. He smiled gently. Merry late Christmas, Elena. She leaned into him. Merry late Christmas, Adrian? They held each other, long and quietly, on the balcony of a house that had become a home. Elena realized she had found not just shelter, but hope, companionship, love. For someone who once lost everything, that was enough. And it was a kind of happiness that felt deeply real, deeply human.